So everybody has questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to
think.
MC that off.
Yeah.
That off.
Okay, and Don, if you can make me co-host again.
Okay. Not letting me minimize this window. Now we're getting feedback. Well, it's not letting me get rid of this.
You're hitting the wrong button. Like, oh. Okay, you go. Yeah. Now make her co-host because that's what I think we're getting feedback.
Good.
I'm censored. Should be no more echo.
So,
All right.
Katrina, you should be all set.
We're ready to
Okay.
go.
Great, thanks. And you can see my screen there?
Okay, we're ready to go.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Katrina McCullough. I'm with GHD. Appreciate your patience there as we work through technical issues are always fun. So David Wright from GHD and myself are going to spend some time presenting the preliminary findings of the Organics Management Plan. Before I get into the presentation, Kevin, I'll just ask if you have anything that you would like to say, or you want me to just get started? I don't hear anything, so I'm going to get started. So for those of you who have been following along this project, we're kind of in the final stages of this organics management plan, although kind of the beginning of an exciting journey ahead. So GHD was hired by Warren County to prepare an organics management plan, which David has been leading for the past several months. And the presentation tonight is really going to present a draft of that plan. Our presentation is about 30 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity to answer questions that any questions that you have. Some of the information that we're going to be presenting is pretty detailed, and we won't necessarily go into all of the details. The plan will be available online, though, for everyone to take a look at and to review. So just to step back before we get into that, again, if you've been following along, then this will be of no surprise to you why Warren County is considering a composting program. Of course, it would provide local businesses and residents a way to manage both food waste and yard waste, ultimately diverting this material from landfill. And this is partially funded by the Climate Start community grant program. So the project team, many of these individuals you kind of see in the room or on the phone here. Obviously, Warren County, Kevin Thomas was leading this project, has since left Warren County. So Kevin has taken up the realms in this final stages. And then GHD Consulting Services, that's David on the phone, myself, McKenna, and I think, I'm not sure if Bob is on the call as well, supporting us. And then of course we've been been provided some invaluable input and advice from the advisory committee, which includes municipal staff as well as residents, local residents, and members of the Zero Waste Warren County and elected officials as well. So the advisory committee has been meeting every month, and we've been presenting the plan as it develops to them, and they've been providing some really important direction to us. So really the study, what is the organics management plan, the document itself encompass? At the end of the day, kind of the so what, if you want to jump to the very end, the key thing is that it's a set of recommendations and strategies to meaningfully increase organics recovery and divert from landfill and convert to compost. So there's a number of steps that GHG took to get to those recommendations and strategies in terms of, what the existing waste composition is, engaging with the community, which I'll get into, what are the different technologies available, and the feasibility of a potential composting facility. So we'll cover all of this, the presentation for the next half an hour. We'll really cover each one of these topics at a high level. So the first task in terms of existing conditions, and this first half I'm going to go over pretty quickly because, to be honest, I think a lot of people are probably just interested in the recommendations, which David will speak to at the end. As you can see, as I said, we've been working over the past several months, meeting with the advisory monthly. And we really started with that existing conditions report. And so in order to do that, David and his team really looked at what is the current organic, like what are the current organics being generated in Warren County. And what they found was that there is no surprise. There's lots of organic material being generated, lots of food waste being generated, and lots of yard waste being generated that's being sent to the landfill. As well, looking at the system as a whole, because an organics management program or a composting program really has to tie into the existing system in order for it to work well. So they looked at the existing, transfer stations and recycling centers, other composting operations in the area, and waste collection, which right now is privatized. So there's no county hauler, so to speak. Interesting statistic here in terms of we heard a lot of feedback from the community about commercial and institutional organics. And so about half of the total waste generated in the county is residential, and a little bit less than half is commercial and institutional. So right now, about 30% of the total garbage of the total waste is food and yard waste. So that means there is a significant opportunity to divert that material from landfill and to compost that food and yard waste. And so again, that includes not necessarily all of these materials would be included in a composting program, but they did look at how many food scraps are being generated, yard waste, wood, other compostable paper like tissue paper or facial tissues, and additional woody products. We also looked at other composting facilities. What are other communities doing? What's working well? What lessons can be learned? And so there's a few examples on the screen, which we shared with the advisory committee. Different types of technologies being used in different communities, and different types of service models, including drop-off facilities is one of the more common ones. Different financial models or fee structures as well. So in terms of the community outreach, which is the part of the project that I led, some of you may have been at the first community engagement session in March, which was very much a listening exercise. We wanted to know whether residents would consider participating in a composting program, what they thought was important, what they valued, what they liked, disliked, to really set the direction. So there was broad support. We saw that both at the community engagement session and in the survey that I'll talk about in a minute. There was a sentiment from many stakeholders or from many residents that the quality of the compost was really important and that they wanted to minimize the contamination. So at the end of the day, We want to compost, but we really want a really good compost product at the end of the day. And if you were at that session, you'll probably remember also that there was quite a significant discussion around the large generators as well, like restaurants and resorts. So that community survey really kicked off or community meeting really kicked off a survey. Really pleased to see we got over 170 responses from residents to that survey. And that included a mix of people who compost right now. So you can see, about 90 respondents who compost right now, and their own food waste and yard waste. A number of residents who compost yard waste, and then quite a few residents, about 50 respondents who don't compost at all. And so we wanted to understand from them what would motivate them to participate in a composting program. And so we asked about different behaviors and factors that would influence their participation. Convenience was one of the things that kind of rose to the top or floated to the top in terms of factors. And many people said that they simply weren't aware of composting programs. In terms of cost, sometimes that is important in terms of how much it costs and whether that would influence. And we really saw a mix of people who said that how much the program cost would influence their participation. And so the survey results showed, of those, if I look at just the people who said they don't compost right now, they don't have a backyard composter or they don't participate in one of the other programs. 95% of the people who don't compost think that Warren County could do more to divert food and yard waste. And between 45 and 66% would be willing to participate in a compost program. So that's a really good number and a really good sign to say there is a potential, there is an appetite in the community for a composting program. So I think, David, is this where I'm turning it back over to you?
Yeah, that would be it. Can you hear me okay, Katrina?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So again, thank you everyone for the opportunity to present this very important study this evening. Again, my name is David Wright. I'm a senior consultant and engineer with GHD. My office is based in Syracuse, New York, and it's been a privilege to work with the Warren County community. We, as a company, take pride in the communities that we support, and the county's steps forward in this type of program is one that we're aligned and share vision with as an organization, because it underscores what a sustainable community could become. As well, just really love the community in Warren County, the scenic nature, and was recently with my family in Lake George for a vacation. So it was great to visit. So what we'd like to transition now of what Katrina has introduced, the front half of the presentation, is looking at what the study actually evaluated. And then after we look at some of the options and solutions available to the county, transitioning to a discussion around cost, and finally wrapping up the presentation around what are the strategic and preliminary recommendations of the plan. I wanted to introduce and revisit how the conversation started in December 2022 with the advisory committee, which was we had a conversation around value. And members of the advisory committee, including municipal stakeholders, supervisors, as well as concerned citizens, brought forth three themes. The first theme was about the community values quality compost, that the finished product of the compost material that's produced is usable, beneficial to the local community. People have confidence using it, whether that's for landscaping uses or personal use at home. In addition, the community values the cost of the program. It's why we spent at GHD quite a significant effort working alongside DPW to evaluate the costs could be I will say at this point, the costs are very conceptual in nature. Our expectation is that as DPW implements the recommendations from this study, more evaluation will be considered as far as the cost. And the third principle was around sustainability. And when we sat at the table with the committee, the common theme was we value buy-in. We want to be sure that the community is aligned to the vision. And that's why the study has included not only this community outreach session, but also the ones prior in the survey. So with that said, GHD evaluated potential pilot program. A pilot program is a great first step to get your feet wet without a full commitment of costs and resources and the management of a program. And the three pillars we looked at for a pilot included backyard composting, of which the town of Queensbury already makes available the purchase at cost for composting bins in the backyard. So that's something that's already happening in the county, and of consideration would be expanding that, making it more well-known and looking to implement backyard composting for purchase of two bins you see in the screen on the left-hand side, making units like that available for purchase at either low cost to residents or at cost pass through the county to residents. And as well with that, the ongoing training and education to say what can be composted, what cannot be, how do you manage a good mix in your backyard composter, and then what do you do with the end product. The second pillar we looked at was drop-off locations. And drop-off sites are something that a lot of communities in New York State are making available to their residents. And what this consists of is usually 1 to as much as 3 times per week, having a drop-off station where residents can bring from their home food scraps that they produce in their kitchen to a drop-off location. The material would be collected. There would be someone available to station that collection site. And we, and as well as the advisory committee, thought that a good location to pilot drop-off sites would be at existing transfer stations. The reason is because the public already has some use of those facilities. They're already permitted solid waste management facilities, and there's a pattern of behavior already in place. As people bring their garbage, they could be separating their food scraps at home and bringing that in a separate bag or container to be dropped off. The third, which would probably come later in implementation, would be a curbside collection. So in Warren County, the current nature of waste collection is privatized, which means that residents have the ability to hire a private waste hauler to pick up trash at the curb. Something that, larger urban communities, New York City as an example, some suburbs of Massachusetts are having curbside collection of organic waste. In that case, the municipality usually provides a green or brown bin at the curb that's picked up by a waste hauler. And that collection happens typically weekly, and it works in concert with programs that exist as trash collection, as well as, in Warren County's case, single stream recyclables collection. The next component of our study beyond the pilot was looking at the question of, could Warren County develop either as a municipal owned and operated facility, or as a public-private partnership, or as a municipally supported but privatized large-scale composting facility. So one of the criteria for this study was that we only evaluate municipally owned land. And the two site locations you see are conceptual. The county's not made a commitment as to the site that will be selected in this study, but these two locations look promising. And there's a whole set of criteria we've evaluated, identified on the slide, and they range from everything from utilities to permit compliance to zoning, and as well being mindful of the nearby residences. A large-scale composting facility in the county would need to go through permit process. That would include local environmental review under New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. As well, it would include, most likely based on the processing capacity or the tons managed per year, a permit from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or the DEC. A subtask of our review of feasibility was also to consider technology. And there are a range of composting technologies implemented at different municipalities across New York State. We wanted to, and DPW agreed, benchmark how are other existing operations doing. A common theme is that usually there's a low-tech solution first, and then once a municipality introduces food scraps to an existing yard waste composting facility, the food scraps introduce additional regulatory requirements. And at that point in time, usually necessitates more advanced technology, which means an investment for infrastructure. In the case of managing food scraps specifically, the two concerns from the state's regulatory perspective are stormwater management and leachate management. Because there's a lot of precipitation in the county and in upstate New York, and the water in the process needs to be controlled and managed as a wastewater if it touches the process material. So when we looked at technology, we also obtained the advisory committee's input as to what do they value in terms of criteria. And no technology, I would say, is the silver bullet. There are compromises. And this slide presents that organized hierarchy of what's valuable. So the priority for the committee was operating cost, that be less than or equal to the current landfill disposal cost. That was number one. And then moving downward in priority, the next was environmental control. That's things like leachate and stormwater odor management that I mentioned. Flexibility, reducing the risk of downtime, implementing the facility in an existing site that's county owned, reducing the initial capital cost of construction, and finally minimizing the number of staff, because it does take employees to effectively operate and maintain a facility of this type. So on the next slide, what we have presented is 3 of these technologies we've evaluated. Katrina already mentioned we've done a detailed analysis of the pros, cons, and cost considerations for each. The 3 technologies we looked at were turned windrow composting, aerated static pile or ASP composting, and finally covered aerated static pile or covered ASP, or sometimes it's called CASP, when it introduces a membrane tarpaulin like fabric cover over the process material. Each of these has nuances in terms of environmental control. They all perform effectively for management of food waste and yard waste composting. And there's a variety of operational controls around each technology that would need to be implemented. So transitioning now, having to introduce to everyone what the solution could look like, we'd like to talk about cost. The good news is there are grant opportunities, and there's a whole suite of them. In my career, which is now in its 12th year in New York, I've never seen a time prior where there's been more funding opportunity for these types of programs. The grants that currently are in place will fund as much as 100% of a pilot program. They'll also fund as much as 50% of new infrastructure, which includes equipment for processing. So we've been working with DPW in real time as we've been implementing the study to identify suitable grant opportunities and understand the timelines for application and the monies that would be available. The next slide relative to cost, and this was a specific task of the study, was to look at the cost of a pilot program with an expectation that the cost could inform a grant application. So there are a variety of factors at play and a whole lot of assumptions. We wanted to present to the community the bottom line. And these costs are benchmarked against what other municipal entities like Warren County have applied for applications in New York State. Notably, City of Albany had a pilot program. I forget the exact number, forgive me, but I believe it was around $200,000 that had been awarded in the last 2 years, and they're implementing that pilot. So you again see the same 3 pillars we introduced, and that's backyard composting. So making available for a subsidized cost, backyard composting, and supporting the education and outreach and administration of that program. Implementing drop-off locations at 3 pilot locations, likely transfer stations, staffing those drop-offs and managing that over a 6-month period. And then looking at the potential for curbside collection, where the pilot could be implemented for a 6-month period. There's quite a range in cost for curbside collection. The lower end would be in the case that the county is able to partner with an existing private hauler to implement the program. Having evaluated the pilot program costs, we then look at the large-scale composting facility. Katrina introduced what's the aggregate organic waste tonnage available for composting. That number of 24,000 tons per year. We felt it would be great if all of that could be composted, but the reality is not all of that will be recovered for various reasons. Some's going to be diverted to other beneficial use, such as animal feed, or in the case of having competition with other private facilities that could be developed, or neighboring counties that might be implementing similar initiatives. So we cut the number basically in half with some other assumptions and looking at other examples and case studies to 10,000 tons per year. And we based the conceptual cost of a large scale facility and the design around 10,000 tons per year. Those rate assumptions will all be published in our report as well. So the bottom line, how over each of those different technologies we evaluated, which the screen showed the photos previously for Turn Windrow, ASP, and CASP. We're presenting these costs as a range because there still is a lot of unknown. We've not selected a site. We don't yet know fully all the utilities that might be available to that site, or even how the county might navigate the public-private partnership or privatization of a facility on municipally owned land. So I'll say that as the intro, but you can see the range of costs is as low as less than $1 million to as high as just below $5 million for capital. We didn't evaluate something as a net present value, but for a point of comparison, everyone should review and look at the operating costs, which takes what we estimated for operating costs per year divided by the throughput tonnage of 10,000 tons of processing capacity. So when you look at the operating cost, the consistent trend is that the operating costs for a composting facility we estimate to be less than the current cost of landfill disposal. So if just by a simple back of the envelope, if I might put it that way, comparison, all else equal, the cost of operating a facility once it's been developed and established could be less than what the county currently pays for landfill disposal on a per ton basis. One caveat is that the composting facility cost estimate does not include equipment. We recognize that the county has a lot of existing equipment that could be repurposed to a composting facility. Equipment is also available for rental in the case that it's not needed, except for seasonally, or some equipment could be purchased through other means, such as through loans or grants, as I mentioned before. So that those equipment costs are not captured in the price per ton. You can go 2 slides forward, Katrina, to the conceptual site layout. We were asked by DPW to provide what a site could look like in terms of space. I think the summary would be, we believe for 10,000 tons per year, we need a facility size that's between about 4 to 6 acres in area. That would include all of the requisite stormwater requirements, as well as setbacks required by the Part 360 regulations. The ancillary components of the facility would include things like a office trailer for employees and for the management of scale transactions, as typically materials that are brought in and out of a facility of this type would be over a truck scale. All right, now we're ready to talk about the recommendations. So what we did is we put together a roadmap. That's the last slide, but leading up to the roadmap, and I introduced this a bit at the beginning and we'll revisit it now. So what's the strategic value to the county? First, and based on the community survey that GHG's completed, there seems a public interest in the program. That's based on the survey results and the prior engagement session. Secondly, a project like this presents an opportunity to reduce the quantity of organic waste managed to landfill disposal. That mission is aligned with the grant program that funded this project, which is the New York State DEC Climate Smart Communities Grant Program. It's also aligned with the New York State Solid Waste Management Plan. Third, there's an opportunity to create locally available alternatives to fertilizer. One of the interesting findings or through conversations is that landscapers that currently apply fertilizer in the county would be interested to use compost, especially if it was of high quality, is why the members of the advisory committee had encouraged us that the quality of the compost is very important to the community. Fourth, there's an opportunity for job creation, whether that be for the construction of the facility, its operations, or the programmatic management. The fifth value was that it aligns, I already mentioned the solid waste management plan, but in addition, two legislative mechanisms that now are being implemented in New York State. The first is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, which is an aggregate view of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. Landfills are identified as a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in New York State, and alternatives to landfill disposal are encouraged as an outcome of that act. The second law that's now in effect is the New York State Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law, which currently looks at any large organic waste generator, more than 52 tons of organic waste per year generated, they would be subject to comply to the law. So Warren County takes value in providing those business entities in the community an opportunity to recycle locally. And six, relative to the cost discussion, there appears to be an opportunity to offset the current costs for landfill disposal, although the return of investment has not been evaluated in detail for this study. It's a future step that I believe DPW could take. So our preliminary recommendations are on the next slide. And those preliminary recommendations we put on a timeline, and that's the conclusion of the presentation forthcoming. The first is that a solid waste coordinator is an ongoing need. As well, there's a recommendation for a recycling coordinator to position to be opened in fiscal year 2025. Most of the municipal programs like this that currently exist have both roles, because once you begin to manage organics to a composting facility, the recycling coordinator role becomes necessary. There's a lot more questions to manage, more community outreach and engagement. The second is that the county pursue grant applications for the 6-month pilot. That pilot cost has been presented, as well as pursue grant opportunities for the actual infrastructure of a large facility. The third would be to implement the pilot program in fiscal year 2024, and that pilot program to also include a waste characterization study. One of the assumptions we've made in the current study is that the waste generation data is all based on New York State DEC estimates, and there would be an opportunity to refine those estimates through a characterization study during the pilot. The fourth is exploring partnerships, and that could be informal or could be more formalized through requests for expression of interest. The fifth would be to finalize the business case and model, including a detailed market assessment for the finished compost product. And the sixth and final recommendation will be to consider expanding the county support of local composting initiatives. Some of those initiatives already exist. Some of them could exist as a result of the pilot program. So we've captured all of these recommendations in a summary slide over a 3-year timeline. And that timeline is presented here. Because we're reaching the end of our time, I guess I'll say the 4 in parallel paths we've identified is first for the pilot, second around funding opportunities, third a timeline related to the overall the potential for a large scale facility, and fourth ongoing public outreach and education. As we're reflecting and wrapping up the conversation with the advisory committee in the final meeting about 2 weeks ago, the common theme was that there seems to be great momentum. And speaking for myself personally, it's been a real privilege to journey with the county on this study. and as well with the members of the committee and DPW under Kevin Hajos' leadership. So with that, I think this concludes our presentation in terms of the study evaluation, and I'll pass it back to Katrina to wrap up what is the next steps from here. So thank you.
Katrina, you're on mute.
Couldn't find my unmute button. There we go. Thanks. Thank you, David. So in terms of next steps or what's needed to finalize this plan, there was a presentation to DPW committee a few weeks ago, very similar to the presentation you just saw. Then there'll be another presentation to the Board of Supervisors next week. As I said, the plan will be posted, and if you have any comments, then Kevin would like to, Kevin's email address is up there, and we'd like to hear from you. We are hoping we'd like to finalize this plan in January, so hoping for any comments that people have by the end of next week, and then we'll wrap things up. So with that, I will open it up to questions. So because we are hybrid, we've got some people online as well as in person. I see Don's on camera there, so I'll let you manage if there's anyone in person that has any questions. If you are online and you have questions or comments, I would ask you to raise your hand. You can either raise your real hand or you can use the raise hand button in Zoom, which is usually kind of at the bottom of your screen. It should say reactions and then raise hand.
So Katrina,
yeah.
real quick, I just want to jump in because we had technical difficulties tonight getting this going. So I just, as a housekeeping, if you'd like to ask a question of David or Katrina, please come over here to this laptop and ask that question, because the microphones around the room are not connected because we couldn't get them connected tonight. So you can certainly come over here and ask your question, and I will move so you can sit down and ask your question. Thank you, Katrina.
Thanks. And I don't see anybody on Zoom with their hand up. So is there anybody on the room that has any questions?
Yes, we've got a lady coming over now.
Hi, Katrina, it's Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi, I just have a quick question. The two sites that were identified, the stone quarry over in South Glens Falls or Hudson Falls or something, and then the Tony Pit. Is either one of them, do they meet the requirement of the 4 to 6 acres that are needed for the site, or what was recommended for the site? Is that land available at either one of those?
I can answer that, Katrina.
Yep.
So it's a great question, Barbara. And you would have more intimate site knowledge of the Tony Pit as well. You know, there need to be some reconfiguration to either site. I think Stone Quarry provides some more flexibility in terms of usable space.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Do we have anybody else in the room who has any questions?
Does not appear so at this point.
Everyone followed David's discussion on cost and no one got lost like I did?
Actually, we do have Supervisor Ben Driscoll.
I guess I'll ask a question for people like myself who aren't as much authorities on this matter as a number of people in the room are. There were 3 methods that were on one of the slides, and I'll call one a low risk method, a medium risk method, and a more riskier method. And of course, the cost, but also the potential for revenues increases as you kind of move up the ladder. If you start at the beginning, this is a naive question. If you start at the beginning, do you have an opportunity to kind of grow on to the next level, or do you need new equipment, a new a whole new, to start from step one in order to make that move to a higher one, or do you need to kind of make your choice at the beginning and live with it? If people understand what I'm asking.
And just
Yeah,
to confirm, you're talking about the 3 technology options that I have up on
Right,
the screen,
yes,
right?
yeah.
yeah, Katrina, I can help with that too. So it's a great question and one we get often. So I'm glad it's being asked. I guess the first thing I'd say is that there's not necessarily an increased revenue opportunity when you look at these options, because the revenue opportunity from composting is usually the sale price of the finished product, and that's typically, in the case it's being wholesale distributed to like a landscaper, or more high quality compost can sometimes be bagged and branded and sold as a bag compost material at your local Home Depot or Lowe's even, or other local landscape company. So when we look at the technology, I would say generally composting as a process is very forgiving to a point. Food waste introduces more complexity because of the moisture. And that's why often when we see communities introduce food waste to existing yard waste composting facilities, they make an additional investment in infrastructure, which would be depicted by the 2 slides, the middle photo, which is the aerated static pile composting process and the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency, or OCRA, composting site at Amboy, New York. And then a next layer of technology would be actually covering that process material, which is a benefit for stormwater diversion. So getting stormwater away from processed compost, as opposed to managing that through the process pile as leachate. So there's some environmental benefit there, as well as the fabric membrane provides some odor mitigation. So I would say, and I probably would have a lot of debate with industry colleagues, but any of these methods is suitable. The factors that more are important to consider is what's the site context, how much area do I have available, and the thing that is important to note is processing time. So the turn windrow composting method processing time is typically 6 to 9 months. Whereas if you go to aerated stack pile composting, the process time reduces to 2 to 3 months. So you're reducing it by a factor of about 60%. So because the processing time is less, you need less area to achieve the same aggregate throughput tonnage. So hopefully those are some of the themes around technology selection. So it'd be site suitability, who are the nearest neighbors, how do we manage odor, what do we do with leachate and stormwater, and then processing time. And then once you make the transition from yard waste to food waste, typically you need more advanced technology.
Thanks very much, and thank you for explaining it in understandable terms for me.
No, thank you for the question. It's great. Appreciate that.
Anyone else?
We do have one more.
We have one more coming up.
And if you don't mind just introducing yourself as well for my notes.
My name is George Armstrong. I've been in Warren County now in Queensbury for the last year and a half. From Whitehall. Would there be room enough for these facilities at the existing landfill or wherever the leaves go on? I believe it's Ridge Road. I've been there once. Would there be room enough? I mean, or do you have to come up with another whole landscape, another whole area?
David wants to answer that. I don't know if everybody can hear me or David, you can hear me, but we looked at these 2 specific sites because those are county-owned facilities. When you talk about Ridge Road or any of the other transfer stations, they're town-owned facilities. And I'm not sure how much acreage each one of those has. 4 to 6 acres, I think John could probably answer Ridge Road. You probably don't have that.
No. Because you have a landfill and you have a solar company that wants to use the mounted part of the landfill.
Okay.
But those two transfer stations would work well for drop-off spots for food and lawn deposition. 70% of the county lives in Queensbury and Glens Falls. And those two transfer stations, the one on Ridge Road that you talked about, the one on Luzerne Road, are co-community recycling and deposition station.
What happens to all the leaves now?
We bring them to Ridge Road and they compost, and we offer them the compost for free. Nobody comes and gets it. So we just did a contract with Mr. O'Connor, who has the adjacent gravel pit. And he wants our wood chip and lawn, because he wants to start a composting facility there, because he does projects where he probably needs the soil, the topsoil.
Okay. My only last comment is that where I live off of Morgan Drive, I think the town does a fabulous job of picking all that stuff up. And as I drive around and I see all the bags and bags and bags, piles and piles, and now they're all gone. Thank you.
Yeah, well. You know,
Thanks.
in the old days.
Katrina, just hold on one second. Does anybody else have any other questions? Again, they will be here for the board meeting. David, I will tell you that that's a night board meeting and we have a lot going on that night. So so far you've given this presentation twice. So I think that'll be a quick presentation for the board meeting. I think a lot of people have seen this already and they will be able to see it on the YouTube as well. So I think we will, and I hate to say this to you because I know you can't shorten anymore, but shorten that down a little bit, or maybe we just touch on the recommendations for the board meeting.
Yeah, that's appropriate.
The last thing I wanted to say for this group and to David and Katrina, I couldn't have asked for a better consultant to come on board with us. You guys have done a fantastic job, and we've thrown with the advisory committee a lot at you, and you guys have come through every time. So thank you for what you both have done, and I will see you on the 14th.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks very much.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I think that's it. If anybody has any more questions, as they said, my email's up on there. Feel free to email me. I will make sure I pass them on to Katrina and to David. And I thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Katrina, thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.